and welcome to those of you who've made it on this Friday afternoon. I'm Anna Hume, and I'm the chair of the Children's Media Foundation, who are sponsoring this session about the BBC. As we all know, there's a huge amount of discussion going on at the moment about the future of the BBC, both in terms of its funding and its governance. And we obviously are all concerned about what impact any changes, possible potential changes, might have on children's services and output. And so the Children's Media Foundation has decided that we should have a listening process over the next few months where we sort of outline the possibilities of things that could or might happen and just get reactions from the various stakeholders in the children's world, so that when it comes to making decisions, we will have been really informed about what people think, what they feel, and what they think should happen to the future of the BBC and its children's services. So you, the industry, are the first lot to be listened to. We're going to have views from the panel, and then it's up to you in the room. So we're really, really interested to hear what you all have to say. So I'm going to hand over now to Hardeep Singh Kohli, who is going to chair this session. Hardeep.
25 years since I joined Children's Department, and I'm still scared of Anna Hume. And a great admirer. It's such a privilege to see you again. This is a little bit weird for me, because wherever I look, there's someone I used to work for. Invariably only once, which says more about my departure from production. A hugely important subject area for me, because like so many people in the industry, I definitively wouldn't be here without children's television starting me off, and the people in it that trained and nurtured folk like me across the industry. It's always not a great surprise to me where people from children's end up. Talking of which, let me introduce the panel. People from children's end up being the director of BBC Children's. Joe Godwin, you probably all know almost as well as I do. That night in Amsterdam will never be forgotten. And joining me from the University of Westminster, trustee of the Voice of the Viewer and Listener, Professor Jeanette Steamers, who's worked extensively in this area, and I think unarguably is probably the expert. Moving to slightly centre-right, rather aptly, given the legacy of New Labour. Helen, we all thought you were on the left. Helen Goodman, MP, who's the Shadow Culture, Media and Sports Minister. And then to the far right, make of that what you will. Ollie Hyatt, who's the CEO of Blue Zoo Animation. The form today is we're going to hear some opinions for about half an hour, and then actually, crucially, it's the opinions from the floor and that discussion that ought really to shape this time together. So, Helen, having worked in children's for as long as I have, I was astonished to find out yesterday, bizarrely, that there is no hypothecation within the licence fee for children's programming. Do you think the BBC should prioritise the children's service and make it hypothecate funding within whatever licence fee settlement there is? Is that tenable?
Well, it's a decision for the BBC and for the BBC Trust, and it's obviously not for politicians to direct the BBC in how the licence fee is spent. But, I mean, it's absolutely clear that we must have good quality children's programming. At the moment, the BBC is really the only major channel producing that, and I think everybody is committed to the continuation of that.
But it seems interesting in other aspects of public life, for example, big sporting events and the like, the government and the shadow cabinet are happy enough to express an opinion. One might surmise that children's television isn't important enough for you to issue a diktat saying it's mandatory to have funding for children's television.
Well, as a matter of fact, it was mandatory under the old Broadcasting Act for children's... Well, I'm sure everybody in this room knows this. I don't wish to teach grandmothers to suck eggs. To have this. And it was that requirement was relaxed in 2003. And actually one of the things I was going to say, which looks beyond the BBC, is that the evidence is that relaxation has caused quite a lot of problems, because it's since then that we've seen the collapse, and that's left the BBC as the only major producer now. I don't think there's any question that the BBC will continue to do this. I can't conceive of a world in which they wouldn't do this and that we wouldn't support them to do it.
I mean, Ollie, as an entrepreneur with Blue Zoo, do you think there's a craftier way of issuing tax breaks and the like to the BBC? Is there a model in your head that feels more sustainable? Because if the BBC in-house production is the biggest player in the game, that can't be healthy for the independent sector.
I would agree. Competition is always good. People talk a lot about other channels not doing so much or not doing so much public sort of broadcasting. You know, I would say that some are doing more. Nickelodeon are commissioning stuff, albeit animation, probably with the help of that tax credit. So people are doing more. But yes, the BBC are the only player in town. Even if they weren't the only player in town, I would still suggest that their budget should be spent proportionally. And while there is no wording in the trust document, they do have to fairly represent communities. And I would say children are part of communities and they should be represented fairly. And that doesn't just mean with numbers of hours of television. They should have a budget that is at least some way near proportionate to you know, the spectrum they're trying to cover, which is roughly sort of 14%, 18% of the population, depending on how you regard children.
But isn't the issue there, if one holds a figure up and therefore holds the BBC to account on the figure, if, say, 14% of the viewers aren't children, it slips to 11, it's very easy for a government then to say, well, you're only getting 11% of the viewers, therefore we will cut that part of your budget to 11%.
Well, I think incentives are always good. You don't want to put in sort of onerous sort of complications, but I think right across, I mean, this isn't just a TV forum here. I know this debate is, but I think with things like the Arts Council and their funding, for example, they spend 1% of their budget on children's, and I think that anyone who's getting public money to do cultural, arts, media, whatever, should look and be tasked with trying to reach a certain percentage of...
I mean, in defence of the Art Council, it's very expensive to park your Range Rover near the Royal Opera House, so I think that I would hate to see that funding diminished. Professor Steemers, I mean, inevitably, to make... I don't know, I'm loath to speak on behalf of everyone, but everyone I know that's worked in this area would love there to be a continuation of the licence fee. There is... We won't know what we've lost till it's gone, to quote Joni Mitchell. It was, wasn't it? But necessarily one has to interrogate other funding models to assure the licence fee payer that this is the best way forward. But are there any other funding models for the BBC and for children's television that might be serious players should the bone be cut at the BBC?
Well, I think the voice of the listener and viewer's view is that the licence fee is it's not perfect, but it's the best thing that we have. I think there are a lot of people talking about alternatives, and I think the biggest one is subscription. And I think there's a real danger with subscription that if the BBC turns to subscription, whether it's voluntary or not voluntary, is that it changes the nature of the organisation, so it doesn't become any different from its commercial rivals. It's no different than, say, Netflix or HBO, and it sort of it puts a... I think it would make it more difficult to make certain types of programs, because if you're with subscription, then you're sort of duty bound to sort of make certain types of programs and not certain types of others.
But having said that, Netflix and HBO have knocked it out the park in terms of contemporary drama production. So, isn't that an argument for subscription?
Well, I would argue that Netflix has knocked it out of the park with maybe one or two productions, and those are not British productions. Remember that Netflix and Amazon, these are multinational corporations that operate transnationally. They're not really particularly interested in producing, programs, children's programs, particularly for a British audience. I mean, they're big multinational corporations. So the BBC, I think, in that respect is different in that it caters for children in this country, and it produces programmes that are particularly attuned to children living in a British environment. And I think that is reflected in the payment system as well. There are other alternatives, and those are usually variations on the licence fee. So if you go to Germany, I think it's become a per household licence fee, so it's not particularly fixed to the television set. I think in this country there have been some problems with sending people to prison for not paying the licence fee. I don't think that's a good thing, so I think decriminalisation is good. There are ways of maybe sort of fixing it to utility bills. That might be a possibility. There are ways of making it a tax. This is what they did in the Netherlands. But I'm always slightly worried about a tax because it seems to work in the Netherlands because, I'm married to a Dutchman, they're nice people. I don't entirely...
And the tallest nation on the planet,
and the tallest
interestingly.
nation on the planet as well. But I'm not entirely convinced that it would work in this country because, much respect to Helen, I think that the politicians, once it becomes a tax, you get too many politicians sort of involved. Who fixes that? I think
I didn't want to turn it into a tax either. I agree with you. I think you're right. I think the licence fee is a guarantee of independence. And the Labour Party definitely wants to continue with the licence fee. The only question is whether the sanctions, in our minds, I mean, not in the minds of the Tory right, but in our minds, the only question is whether the sanctions need to be changed and whether we should decriminalise, because as you say, 50 people going to prison every year, it's not a good thing. Could we have some different sanctions?
Yeah, and actually you wouldn't want to send people to prison now. I'd probably have to share a cell with Andy Coulson.
But even with the licence fee, there are problems there about government interference. I mean, my eyes were opened in 2010 when the coalition sort of steamed in there and made the BBC responsible, for the World Service, S4C, broadband. So it's not a particularly protected form of funding either, but it's the best thing that we've got, and I can't see any other alternatives at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. Helen and Jeanette were talking about kind of the macro funding. At the coalface, Joe, it's a different deal altogether. I mean, as I say, I first came to East Tower in 1992, 93.
I remember.
How could you forget? So many men with turbans working on security and in the canteen. How little's changed, Tony Hall. How little's changed. But we were always, anytime you like, we are here, and like children, we watch television. There was always I kind of sensed that, as is typical of my timing, I'd stepped in moments after the kind of halcyon days of children's telly. But speaking to Anna...
Sorry, you stepped in after what?
The kind of the halcyon days of children's telly, in terms of, one always gets the sense that there was more money before you were there. But there's always been pressure.
There was not more money in children's television in 1992 than there is now.
No, but I suppose that's the point I'm making, is that there is a perception through the ages that things are tight, budget-wise, in children's telly. There isn't enough money to make it.
Which is partly a factor of doing more and partly a factor of things costing more. But you're right, and that's similar to it's like policemen always getting taller or shorter or whatever it is, younger, that's what they're... I think people always, the halcyon days, and I just wanted to make that point, that this is the halcyon days of children's television.
Really? You believe that?
Absolutely.
Why?
Choice, quality, breadth, and I'm not just talking about the BBC, which I think is incredible breadth and quality, but look at the amount of choice children have got from 34 dedicated children's television channels, websites, apps, e-books, the media choices of children and the quality of it in a very competitive market are phenomenal.
But I suppose I've always thought about children's in terms of budget as akin to Radio 4, where there's so much less money in Radio 4 when compared to television, that if you simply apply a percentage cut to midweek or a percentage cut to a television programme, the outcomes are very different. And children's always seemed to somehow pull on the goodwill of those that worked on it, and got so much more bang for its buck, because people... I mean, look around this room. I can't think of another area of television where there are people that have worked for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in your case, Joe. But there is a lifelong dedication to the sector. But if further cuts come in and the salami slicing comes along, will we then see quality affected, or will you find another creative way to deal with it? Will you move online completely at the BBC for children's television?
So many questions. Can I answer some different questions? Can I just pick up on something?
Well, we've got a politician here, and that's sort of what... With the greatest respect, you've been very good. You've been very good. You've been very good.
I will answer those, but I just wanted to pick up on something Helen said and something that Ollie said.
This is what production meetings were like. I'd ask questions, he'd answer different ones, and then tell me off for not making the right film.
The main thing is it's unimaginable that the BBC wouldn't be committed to high-quality children's programmes. It's great that there seems to be a lot of support for the licence fee, which is what has enabled this amazing breadth, this amazing 92 years continuum of programmes made just for children. And it's not going to happen that that's not going to happen, or that's not going to be an important part of what the BBC's offer is the first point. And Ollie said something interesting. He said this isn't just about TV. And I think to your point, and obviously I'd love us to get more money to spend on kids' content. That would be fantastic. I have to be a bit realistic about the other demands on the organisation. The other thing you have to factor into your maths, though, Ollie, is that money that isn't given to me to spend on content is spent to enable our content. The millions of pounds spent on the iPlayer are for the benefit of the children's audience through the iPlayer. So I think it isn't just a simple amount of working out the children's budget as a percentage of the BBC's budget, because we benefit from a lot of the other investments in other bits of the BBC. Children don't just consume the children's content, they consume the other stuff.
Can I ask you a question, which I'd like you to answer, which is about metrics? Because Anna asked me to write a report when I was at Children's, which was about the lost audience between 12 and 16, because technically we stopped making television when you became 12, and then sort of adult telly kicked in at 16, and it was a fascinating 3 weeks of work on that. How, in an increasingly accountable sphere, it's incredibly difficult to measure AIs of this audience, and just the kind of the collateral around the appreciation and the engagement and where it leads people, the younger viewers and the like. Is that a challenge you find?
I don't really understand what you mean. I'm
well,
sorry.
How do you measure the enjoyment of the audience? How is it different in children's than it is in other aspects of the BBC, kind of actually quantifying how well the programmes do? Because it isn't just about viewing figures, children's television.
It's mostly not about viewing figures, and as I said on the panel this morning, the biggest challenge for children's content in a world of changing habits, new platforms, new devices, is being able to work out realistically and credibly what the engagement has been. I actually think if you're just measuring television, that's relatively simple. But we've never just been about volume, we've also been about quality, which is why we have regular tracker studies that create children's appreciation indexes for us. Because you're right, that we could make stuff that lots of people stared at but weren't engaging with or weren't getting value out of. So the quality measurement, which we're just finessing, because it's harder to do with kids. It's harder to talk to children about how they appreciate things. But my colleague Madalena Pires, who runs our audiences research team, is here, and we've done a lot of work to be able to improve that quality tracking, and that is very important.
Professor, do you concur with Joe's take that children's television's never been better, never been more varied?
Well, I think it's a subjective view, isn't it? But I would say, having children myself, that
half Dutch, obviously, so we need to factor that in.
I think it's true that there is more choice for them, and I would say, looking back at when I was a kid, I'm 50 now, and going home, it was just stuff switched on TV. There was just between 3:30 and 5:30. And it was Scooby-Doo and possibly Blue Peter, and that was it. So there is much more choice.
Oh, what about Vision On? Come on.
Yeah,
Calamero.
that was on, yeah. But I think there
Tales of the Riverbank. Come on.
I think
Flash
there is
and Blade. We could list them all. That wasn't Dutch.
There is definitely more choice. I think the real challenge for the BBC, and I think for all of the big players, is they're in a sort of a bit of a transitional phase now, where we're seeing, some of the consumption patterns are changing. Children are watching TV, they're doing other things at the same time. They're still watching a lot of linear television, but they're doing that off different devices. If they're like my kids, they're watching the TV in the corner, they've got their phone on, they've nicked my iPad. So they are consuming things in a different way, and I think that in 10 years' time maybe the conversations will be a bit different. One of the things that concerns me about the BBC is that back in 2000 they established CBeebies and CBBC, and that was brilliant for the children's sector because it created this canvas for lots of independent producers to produce stuff. What I'm worried about is whether the BBC will still be there in the next phase. and the next phase will be on different platforms. I don't know whether they'll be doing interactive stuff or whatever, but will the BBC still be there? Will it still have the funding to do that? I mean, they've had some cuts with DQF. They've had some additional funding, they've had extra funding, they've had funding taken away. So that is what I'm worried about, whether they will still be there for that next phase. And I think that's a huge challenge for Joe, and I hope that he has a plan.
Well, knowing Joe as I do, I'm sure he has a very good plan. DQF, we all know what that is, delivering quality first. I bumped into Lewis Carney, second in command at Radio 2, who's outside the bar at 3 o'clock on a Friday telling me, delivering quality first. We normally used to deliver it 4th, 5th and 6th. Ollie is one of those in the independent sector. It does feel, I mean, again, the kind of the parallels with radio are very clear. There isn't anywhere else really in the world of radio to take your speech-based content if Radio 4 don't want it. And similarly, there are limited avenues for independents like you. How, you know, Joe's talked about this being an exciting time with variety across different platforms. Is that how you perceive it from outside the tent?
I do. I think I look at it slightly differently because it's an exciting time for all of us with media. There's more media in the world. The only way I ever look at things with children is are they getting what they need, and could they get better, and are they being proportionally represented? So back in what maybe you call the golden days of television, I think there was something like 9% spent on children's. That's certainly not the case now across the board.
Ollie,
not talking about the BBC.
When was this?
Well,
I don't believe 9%
Okay.
of any broadcaster's budgets ever. Anna, that doesn't sound credible, does it?
No, I didn't mean at the BBC. I meant across all the channels. So there were less channels. There was different stuff going on. But certainly now, I would say that there's definitely less money now at the BBC, and we can call it delivering quality first, or we can call it cuts, or we can call it what we like. There's less money for making programming for children. Children's is being asked to do more by the Trust for different groups with no more money. They're being asked maybe to produce more hours, if that's get extended, for no more money. But
also there's a massive cull of management at the BBC, which is the first time that has happened in my living memory, and I'm older than I look.
That's good. I don't miss them.
No, but I think it's not. It does seem like a genuinely different set of cuts. It isn't cuts. Cuts will always touch the output, of course. That's the nature of cuts.
I mean, I agree. The Trust promised that originally the children's would be protected. That changed to relatively protected. But if you go through the BBC full financial statements with a calculator and work it out, BBC Two got cut less than children's. And you see Tony, he's talked passionately, more money for arts, brilliant. He talked passionately, more money for drama. But I don't see many statements about children. I find it really important. And without meaning to throw Joe's own words back at him, I am going to do that.
So therefore you do mean to throw Joe's...
Okay. I hate
Let's not be disingenuous, guys. Okay. We're all children's programme makers.
So just a few things that have been said, which I completely agree with, but they don't come for free. So, for example, Joe, I think this time last year you sat on the stage and said that public service broadcasting and children's content is immeasurably important. You also said you would like to do more to represent more children's voices from around the UK. You said at an event about 2 weeks ago that you broadly believed ever since you'd been in broadcasting that the children's sector was subsidised by independents because there wasn't enough money in it.
No, somebody else said that to me.
Well, if you're going to dispute what you said when, I'm going to come in and say 90% of children's programmes are repeats. And I don't think grown-ups would stand for that.
No, but
so I think there must be a question mark about
respect,
quality.
It's the only part of the audience that fulfills. They move on. And
of course, it's fine for people to watch Top Cat now, just as they did 50 years ago. But the fact is that only 20% of the broadcasting is first-run UK productions. But 45% of the children's audience is that. So that is telling us what the children's preference is. And if the children want to see new homemade stuff, we should try and give them more new homemade stuff.
So
and
is that a manifesto commitment to increase the licence fee for the BBC so they can spend more money on children's.
We won't anticipate the licence fee settlement. That'll come out of the Royal Charter. And one of the things I was going to suggest was that if people in the children's media sector want to give this a push, then the place to do that is in the discussions about the content of the next Royal Charter.
Well, then, if you're... I appreciate you can't tell the Charter what to do, but you can suggest this notion of hypothecation. You can say the BBC must spend X% on children's programmes so that there can be 45% originated programmes.
Well,
as is your desire. You've passionately spoken about it.
As Joe has just said, to fix on a particular number, I think would be rather crude. But
it's your number, it's not mine.
It's their number. It's their watching figures. I'm just reporting to you what the children are doing and saying, well, it's interesting that that's what the children seem to prefer. And maybe if this is programming for children, taking account of children's views is a reasonable thing to do.
It always felt, because I presented one series of Get 100, which was a genius program. It's like numbers, and you've got to get as close to 100 as possible, and the R-squared, it's brilliant.
Is it still on?
No one watches it. And I, it went really well, and I thought there'd be a second series until it was explained to me that actually those that watch it will have grown up. It'll get repeated 3 or 4 times. They'll have grown up, and there'll be a new audience who'll watch it too. And much as I was disappointed because we had great fun, I mean, Chris is here, we had an amazing time making it in a place called Glasgow, which is a big city outside London. You might know it. And
we make lots of
children's programmes there.
Just to guess what the end of this question is going to be.
Can I just ask the question? Is it true that there is that it is a replenishing audience, so you can repeat more?
I think everything that everybody said is true. That it's not binary. It's not all got to be new, all got to be repeats. Children like the ability to watch the stuff they love over and over again. That is not the same as filling a schedule with repeats. I think you have to make new stuff. All the challenges we're talking about inspiring children, about role models, about reflecting contemporary life to them, involve investment in new stuff. But that doesn't mean there isn't a place for narrative repeats of the stuff they love. And if it's good enough quality, which it often is in drama, then you repeat favourites because children at certain times and certain sorts of programmes enjoy doing that. So I don't think it's a black and white thing about new and repeats.
Well, of colour and not of colour. Okay, I won't do political-based satire again. Whatever. Shall we open it to the floor? Has anyone got any questions? Have we just simply bored you into the hell of your hangover? Thank you. Is that Greg, by any chance? Another man I used to work for just once.
It's me, Greg Childs, Children's Media Foundation hat on now. I want to explore something that Ollie brought up, which is the seeming reluctance of the senior management at the BBC, for example, to attend this session, point number 1. And their reluctance to sort of stand up and be counted when it comes to kids. I mean, Joe, maybe you can give us some examples. Maybe I'm doing that classic thing of making stuff up, but I don't hear Tony Hall mention the word children. I don't hear James Purnell talk about how important the children's audience is to the BBC as we go into this crucial round of discussions about charter review and licence fee renewal. PACT are campaigning for an increase in the licence fee. I could see a scenario coming where there will be organisations campaigning for more money for kids if there is an increase to the licence fee, or more money for kids even if there isn't. But we're not hearing anything from the senior management at all where they acknowledge the incredible power of a brand like CBeebies, or the incredible importance of what you do for 6 to 10-year-olds.
I think they do. I think Tony talks about children's as a genre and as output more than any of his predecessors that I can remember. He talked about it 2 weeks ago when he made his announcements about how to improve on-screen diversity. He talked about CBeebies and CBBC in that context. He says it quite a lot. There's been no reluctance to come to this session. There's been an inability to come to this session, and you've been lumped with little old me to talk about it. But there was no reluctance about it. I think the other thing is the detailed debate about the charter renewal and the licence fee hasn't begun. I mean, there's a big thing between here and charter renewal called a general election next year, which, in a way, we don't even know what the sort of the ground rules for the debate will be in that sense. I think you'll hear and see from Tony over the coming months a lot more talking about children's. It is a shame he can't be here, but he can't be here. But he believes it's extremely important. He feels as strongly as I do about it, as does James. And they also realise it's a core genre in terms of the BBC's public purposes. We've got a fantastic big exhibition opening next week at the Lowry Theatre in Salford. 92 years of BBC children's programmes. BBC's been doing children's programmes since December 1922, right from the very beginning. It's an absolutely core part of what we do, and they all get that. They all get that. That's why we're still spending nearly £100 million a year on it 92 years later. But I think you will hear even more, Greg, and I think to Ollie's point about arts and music, and I'm not sure, and again, I don't want to argue with you about things we agree about. I don't think Tony did announce more money for arts and music. It was more about more focus, more pulling together of the stuff we're doing already. And that moment will come for children's as well.
So there's also another big thing between now and 2015, which is Scottish referendum, which may have a direct input on children specifically, given its importance in Scotland. I see I'm the only one in the room that cares about that. Another question, anyone? Really, have we in 35 minutes answered your every worry and concern about Charter Renewal?
Just follow up about the pact thing, wanting an increase in the licence fee, because we haven't actually discussed that, and I wondered if Helen Goodman had any thoughts on that.
Have we got anyone from Pact here, by the way? No? Hungover as well. Helen?
I mean, I do understand the BBC's frustration about the top slicing. I think that now that the World Service has been integrated so closely and thoroughly, unpicking that would be rather unrealistic. And when thinking about the licence fee, you know, what people will be balancing is the undoubted needs and importance of the BBC against the impact on people's cost of living, and that's what people will have in mind. I know this session is about the BBC, but I want to say something about the other broadcasters, because I wouldn't want us to get into the situation where it's all down on the BBC, because actually it's the other public service broadcasters who've really exited this. And one thing that strikes me as really weird is that Michael Gove has this big sort of exercise on British values in schools, but DCMS ministers were renewing the licences to the ITV and Channel 4 without any attention to whether children's television programmes were made in the UK. Now, since children spend a lot of time watching telly, 17 hours a week, it does seem to me that some thought as to what it is they're seeing would be rather sensible.
And how would you shape that requirement on...
Well, it's very difficult now because those licences have been let for 10 years. And that's what's very annoying. I mean, we did used to have a legal framework, and I think, you know, we need to look at it. But it's very difficult to go back on those legal agreements that have just been made. It seems a bit
Would it be so wrong simply to let the market speak in terms of children's television? If children's television was that great, then people would watch it. So why have... Do you know what I mean? Just deregulate the whole thing. It seems to be...
I certainly wouldn't do that.
There is a market for children's television, because you can, if you wanted children's television, you could do it like it's done in many other countries, where you don't make your own television. You just buy it in and you screen things that you've bought from other places. And lots of countries are like that. I mean, we live in this bubble here where we think, you know, we're really hard done by. You know, go to other countries in Europe and look at their children's television. Go to Italy or Spain, and it's wall-to-wall animation. And the public service broadcasters don't invest in it either. I think, you know, what people forget is that Joe has a £100 million budget. The other public service broadcasters, I think when I last looked, were spending £4 million. Now ITV used to spend £30 million. You've lost that. And by the figures that COBA, which represents the satellite broadcasters, I think they spend about 25 million, which compared to the BBC is nothing. So it's easy to criticise the BBC, but I believe that we also need to look at some of the other players here and what they're spending.
Is there a cleverer way, Joe? I don't suppose... Well, let me ask the question anyway. Is there a cleverer way if you took 100 million from the Beeb, 25 from Sky, and 4 million from... Yeah, is there a cleverer way of working across broadcasters with the best interests of children's viewers in mind? Kind of cannier co-productions across.
I don't see the point in that. I think the licence fee funded BBC is a very unique organisation. The licence fee is a very unique, and it goes to the very heart of what the BBC is, which is a publicly owned provider of stuff with public purpose for public benefit. And I think that's a very unique proposition that you couldn't impose and probably shouldn't impose on commercial broadcasters. I would say about Cobit and the other commercial broadcasters, and I appreciate Jeanette's statement, is we're not talking about poor companies. That, you know, the idea that they can't do anything unless somebody incentivises them with public money to do it. And I'm not talking about doing a lot more, but talking about a bit more. But I think what the BBC does with the licence fee should be of a different. It should be about British content, British storytelling, reflecting modern Britain, all those public purposes the BBC has. And that's very vitally important, but I don't think you can expect other people to do that in the same way.
I should add that, I think there's a clear case of market failure and origination for children's production. And I think that it's important that the BBC does things like News Round and documentaries for kids that I think are really valuable and really important for children. But I think that if you left those to the market, they just won't get made. And you see it in other countries. If you don't force people to do it, they won't make it.
But, one wonders, genuinely, kind of growing up watching Press Gang, where we would have been as teenagers without that show. And equally, who would be in all our costume dramas today if those actors hadn't come through? But
But that's still happening.
What,
exactly? No, Press Gang doesn't still happen.
Obviously.
But
in terms of the independent sector's sort of support of television of
there's
that nature.
still, and there are two things about. There's two sorts of. There is a fantastic choice of content. The other broadcasts I'm talking about spend a lot of content, and a lot of children love their content. This isn't about BBC good, everybody else crap. Children love and value the output of Disney and Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and CITV immensely. But we're talking about something within that which is about UK content, both for the benefit of British children, the social capital that it brings to UK PLC in terms of citizenship, in terms of enriching childhoods. That is about British content, and there's not enough of that at the moment.
So we agree.
We have done since the start.
We are all generally pushing in the right direction. Floor, yes, Anna. Sorry, I can't. If Anna's got a hand up, I've got to go to Anna. She was my boss. And then we'll come to this lady sitting behind the other lady.
I was at a gathering the other day in which all the panellists, this was the all-party parliamentary group on broadcasting, I think, when all the panellists agreed, more or less, that this time round the licence fee would be renewed. It might be reduced, but it would be renewed. But they also all agreed, more or less, that within the next 10-year period, the licence fee would really come under severe threat because things are moving so fast, and that the general public would no longer support it in the way that it has been supported. I'd like the panel's views, A, on whether they think that's a possibility, and B, if it did happen, what would happen to kids?
I'll come to you at the end, Joe. Ollie. Can we exist in a world without the licence fee?
I'm sure we can, but I think it will be a different world. I think we can all see what that world will be like from how it is now. You just take the BBC out of the equation and all the great shows that we've just been talking about. We're kind of preaching the converted, Joe, and everyone here agrees the type of shows that need to get made. When the Trust asks for drama and things for an older age group, I think we all agree that that's where the work needs to be. And now I've worked with the BBC for 15 years. I've never sold them a job. Maybe that's because my shows are more commercial and they can find a home. So it's the stuff that I don't do that they do so well, and they're being asked to do more is what we need to support. So for children's, I would say it's the most important thing. I think you can find a lot of what the BBC does on other networks, drama and other such things. But for children's, the stuff that they do, simply no one else is doing it at the moment.
Helen, is it enough simply to extrapolate where the independent broadcasters are now in terms of a an apocalyptic post-license fee world.
Well, no, and in fact, I think the independent broadcasters are the biggest supporters of the licence fee, even bigger than the BBC, because they don't want competition for their advertising, they don't want competition for their sponsorship, they don't want competition for their subscriptions. So I think we'll kind of have this little dance, and then everyone will come back and think, actually, the mixed ecology of British broadcasting, it's rather comfortable for all of us. I think that's what will happen.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Do you think that's what will happen? Or is that, with the greatest respect, sounds a tad over-optimistic? I think, isn't the BBC at the point now where it's, with these cuts being forced upon it, something has to give, and then it makes it less equitable to keep going?
I think the BBC, because we're all here looking at children's programming, but I think we have to look at it in the bigger context of the BBC as an institution and how that will survive. The BBC has a lot of enemies, and they're all sort of ranged up against it across all parties, I think. Some very worrying things that are happening. I think in the past, I always felt as if across different parties, the BBC had some friends, and I feel that it has fewer friends now. And you hear these comments from Grant Scapps or the head of the media committee, Whittingdale, about saying the BBC is too big, about saying that the licence fee's on its last legs and subscription is coming. I think it's a real battle on our hands. I'd like to believe that Helen is right, and that in the end common sense will prevail, because you're right, we have a fantastic ecology here, and the ecology is all about the licence fee being there to produce content which possibly commercial players cannot choose. But it also, as you said, it's the last thing that the commercial broadcasters want is for the licence fee to go, and I suspect that B-Sky B would have something to say if the BBC went subscription only. So I'd like to see it survive. I think it's the pillar of the BBC.
Joe, imagine after 2015 we have an electoral pact in the election and a UKIP Tory coalition. You laugh, that's the least funny thing I've said all day. The rest of it wasn't that good, but do you see the licence fee surviving, when we celebrate 102 years of BBC?
I do actually, but I think to go back to Anna's point, there's a really interesting challenge for not just for the BBC, but for people who think the BBC is a good thing. I think the conversations we've been talking about all week about how children's use of media is changing means that I think the licence fee has to adapt. And the appreciation of the licence fee pay about what they get for it, what it's for, needs to adapt. I think, we were talking this morning on the panel about how iPlayer will become a dominant way children use things. So and the licence fee can adapt. It's adapted from radios to televisions to computers, so it can adapt again. But I think what we've got to do more of, and not just the BBC, but the people who value and support the BBC, is to tell the story of the value and what you get from the BBC and what you wouldn't get with it. I know it's hackneyed, but it needs saying more. The BBC costs 40 pence a day to a licence fee payer. It's nothing. I don't think you can buy a quality newspaper for that, can you?
You certainly can't buy balsamic vinegar for that.
So I think to get
really
young people who maybe this thing that people of my generation still call a television licence, to get young people to associate the value they get from their tablets, their podcasts, their downloads, their apps, that some of that creative value came from this thing called the licence fee. I think that's the story we've got to get better at telling.
And it has to be said that the BBC has had a run of particularly bad PR disasters in the last few years. Does anyone know, maybe you know, Joe, maybe you don't, but the uptake on iPlayer, because whenever I go into a meeting at the BBC and talk about Listen Back, everyone says, yeah, it's like 4% or 5%. And it seems the BBC's, at the behemoth that it is very slow to react. Not in children's, particularly. I think children's is probably much lighter on its feet. But are we really seeing a growth in the non-linear uptake?
Huge, and I think children is double or treble, Madeleine can tell me if I'm making this up, in terms of iPlayer. We've also seen a huge surge in RCBB's radio downloads of podcasts because children are just doing this stuff naturally and more of it. And I think although it's still only a small proportion of the viewing to CBeebies and CBBC is on iPlayer, it's still considerably greater proportion of the contribution to that viewing than the adult equivalent is. And I think we just have to see this as a direction of travel that we've got to... I don't think we're slow to react. I think audience habits are changing at different speeds.
I don't know. I kind of feel the rest of the BBC is very slow to react, but then I'm still waiting on commissioning decisions. Anyone? Any other questions? Nice, yes, lady with the microphone.
The panel thinks of the value of in-house production and whether a public service publisher model might be a viable alternative. And also, the reason I'm asking that question is it strikes me that often these arguments around kind of protecting content and quality for the audience are very much mixed in with protecting our UK industry, and rightly so. I mean, I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case, but I think we have to call a spade, and which is it?
But just before you answer, I heard a rumour once that of the 100% of the licence fee, 6% is spent on talent, on screen, on air, and in production. So even if one were to get rid of the in-house production, you're still spending 94% of the money. What do you think about a publisher broadcaster, Professor?
I think it's really important that you do have in-house production. Actually, we were talking about this just before we set up. I think it's important that some people go through the BBC system and that they get inculcated in the values of the BBC, because the BBC is not just about, you know, making kids programmes. It's also about a system of beliefs around public service and public ethos. And I think you have to grow up with it. There are lots of people in the audience here who were, you know, who worked with Hardit, who trained, you know, came in as very young people, have stayed there for 30 years, may have gone out and worked in the independent sector, and they take some of those values out with them. I think one of the things that I worry about is that you don't get that so much more. So you get young people working the system and they have, you know, short internships, but you don't have that trainee system anymore. So I think it's really, really important that you have some in-house production, but not all of it. I think it's important that the in-house producers are competing with the independents for the best commissions, and you have that system already.
But Ollie, wouldn't that be like Brave New World for you, wouldn't it? If there were no in-house production, you might get something commissioned by the BBC in the next 15 years.
Oh, I doubt it.
You've done yourself a lot of favours today.
I think, like we've all been saying all along, I think actually the balance is about right. I think you could play with the margins and maybe slightly more or slightly less. People have different opinions. I think that some of the greatest shows have come out from in-house because of the way the company's set up and because of the way talent flows through it and different ideas. So, you know, as an independent, I should probably say no, give it all to me. But I'm talking for, you know, hopefully we're up here to talk about what children get out of it. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's not about penny pinching. It's not about, to the children, they're not going to discuss these issues. It's up to us to get the right things in front of them, and it's whatever makes that.
Helen?
Well, I think Ollie's starting point is right, because what we want is for children to see themselves reflected on the screen. Now, there is a question mark, of course, about how reflective of British society the BBC is at the moment. And I know that those people who first of all introduced the 25% independent commissioning were concerned that at that time the BBC culture was too, you know, mono, you know, one track. And so it was a way of opening it up to more diversity. So I guess what I'm saying is, because Britain is a very diverse, dare I say, multicultural society, therefore you're more likely to get that kind of reflection if you have a production process that is also quite diverse.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm confident with such a diverse and multicultural government, we will see genuine pressure on the BBC. Not all of them went to Eton. I think, any more questions from the floor?
Can't I answer the in-house production question?
Well, can you? Okay, I wasn't sure whether you could actually. I didn't think it was...
You know me, Hardeep. I have an opinion on most things. I agree with Ollie and Helen and Jeanette. So
it's not an original opinion in this instance?
I just wanted to build on something Jeanette said, and I think Helen's right about diversity of voices and outlooks is very important to get the creative best, and I think it's very important. You know, the BBC's economic input in Britain is huge and not to be underestimated, and a significant part of that is the money it invests in the independent production sector. I think it's very important, as Jeanette said, about training the culture of children's media that the BBC has nurtured for so many years, which we see in this room, is important. And the BBC isn't just a broadcaster. The BBC is a cultural institution in this country which needs presence and scale around the UK, which I think in-house production plays a significant part in the BBC's ability to leverage its economic impact around the UK. You could argue whether it does that as effectively as it could. You can argue about what the levels of quotas and things are. But I think as part of the mix, it's hugely important.
I mean, again, to reiterate on a personal, I can't think of another room full of people I'd be in where there were at least half a dozen people whose job it was not to train me, whose job it was not to inculcate me with a sense of production values and the rest, but they did it because that was the culture in BBC Children's at the time. Yes?
I just wanted to pick up on something Joe said and that idea of actually having a story and a narrative to tell from the BBC's point of view. And it's always that the BBC seems to be on the defensive because it has to be, because it's always been attacked. But actually there's a way that we can, just picking up on things that Jeanette's been saying, that actually it should be telling a really positive story. And I think there's probably a generation of people who don't know that story. People who are maybe quite considerably younger than me and, you know, some of the panel. And I just think it's a shame that the BBC always has to be on the defence, because we won't, if we lose it, that's it. You know, it will be catastrophic in many ways. And actually that people aren't galvanising and telling that story in the press.
Well, I've just come up with a great idea for a programme called, I just plucked the name, Jack and Nori. They could tell that story to the next generation of programme makers.
I think, just to add to that, I think, you know, if you want to see a bad future, look at New Zealand. They had a fantastic public service broadcaster, TVNZ, and they introduced the publisher model. And I met with the head of the CMF version of New Zealand television, and they have nothing now. They don't commission anything, everything is imported. They don't make any programmes. TVNZ doesn't do anything anymore. They had quite a good production industry. I used to work for Hit Entertainment, and we used to distribute their dramas, South Pacific Pictures. They sold everything. They got rid of everything. So please don't go that route, because it would be very, very bad.
I'm fairly certain they won't be able to get rid of the licence fee, because that will genuinely cause a riot if there's no Archers or Moneybox Live.
Or Blue Peter, or Newsround.
Yeah,
Antiques Roadshow.
but they're probably in bed at the time you have to get a pitchfork and riot. Thanks to the panel, thanks for everyone